Hey everybody, I'm Mike Evers, and I'm ORTHOWORLD's Senior Market Analyst. As we typically do this time of year, I wanted to share with you our projections for the orthopedic market as we get to the end of the year, as well as some early thoughts on the conditions for next year in 2023. But before that, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Triangle, for helping us bring you this information today. Triangle is a leading contract manufacturer of high-performance implants, devices, and instrumentation for the orthopedic industry. Privately held since 1955, Triangle's teams of manufacturing engineers, programmers, prototype technicians, and quality assurance specialists tackle complex challenges for some of the world's leading medical device OEMs. From design for engineering and process development to dedicated manufacturing cells and quality risk management, Triangle partners with you from concept to market launch, using their expertise in design for manufacturing, design for inspection, and lean manufacturing principles, bringing your concept to life and to market with speed and efficiency. So thanks once again to Triangle. Okay, so in the spirit of bringing you the most important information right up front, here's our 2022 orthopedic market at a glance. We're projecting global sales totaling $55.5 billion, reflecting a growth rate of 3.4%, which is just under the pre-COVID average for the market growth rate. In 2022, we did see recovering procedure volumes across most product categories. Now, of course, there's some variation in subsegments and geographical region, but for the most part, it feels like the orthopedic industry is about 95% of the way back to normalized capacity. However, we did see in China a seismic shift in the orthopedic industry as volume-based procurement goes to a national level. And it really ended up as drastic price cuts in joint replacement, spine, and trauma. And of course, the macroeconomic pressures that we all saw this year, such as supply chain disruption, inflation, staffing shortages, we expect those to persist into 2023. Now, taking a look at company performance, and for the sake of time, we'll keep it to companies over 1 billion. And we had a new entrant into this group for 2022. Globus is projected to finish the year just above 1 billion. And as a group, these companies grew 2.2%, which is below the market growth rate. And I think really the challenges are right here. These four companies had the most exposure in China to volume-based procurement. There are some product level gaps that these companies are facing, thinking specifically of how Zimmer Biomet and Smith and Nephew both really upped their cementless knee game this year, but I think they still remain behind the curve relative to Stryker. And then just as a portfolio or business overall, I think some of these companies could use optimization. Zimmer Biomet was the first to really rip off the Band-Aid, spinning off their spine and dental divisions. But I think going forward, we could see some more portfolio rationalization among this group. Now let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into each product segment, starting with joint replacement. And joint replacement got battered during the pandemic, especially knee replacement, had some really serious declines in 2020. As we move into 2022, we're expecting joint replacement revenue of 20 billion and a growth rate of 3.3%. 3.3% is just a little bit below the pre-COVID average for joint replacement. And really, joint replacement has been among the slower categories to recover. But what we're seeing in the US in 2020 is an accelerating recovery for knees and hips. However, we don't expect there to be a big jump in recovery or a large bolus of cases coming back into the funnel at one time. I think really the rate limiter here are the staffing shortages that are ongoing. But we do expect over the next several quarters, perhaps even into 2024, a modest tailwind from these backlogged procedures. The other thing that was happening with joint replacement and spine during the pandemic was large ticket enabling technologies like robotics acted as a revenue life preserver for these segments. Even when elective procedures were at their lowest rate, Hospitals remained in fairly good financial position, and we saw that reflected as record-breaking robotic sales quarter after quarter for a while. As we move into today, however, the market is really shifting away from those one-time lump sum payments and really in favor now of rental agreements and volume-based agreements. Companies are also shifting their focus more towards the ASC and outpatient environment as more procedures shift that way and reimbursement improves. We're seeing that focus both at a product level with implants and enabling technologies designed specifically for the ASC needs. And we're also seeing it at a commercial level with specialized sales forces, financing teams that are really out to put together an ASC focused offense. And Stryker has been a company that really led the way there and has had some great results. And then volume-based procurement in China resulted in about 80 to 85% price decreases for knee and hip implants in China. And that'll certainly be a factor for the next couple quarters until it starts to anniversary out. And then just one more quick slide on joint replacement to give you a visual indication of the arduous climb out of the hole that this segment faced. So what we're looking at here is the quarterly revenue for knees and hips for the big four joint replacement players. So that would be Zimmer Biomet, Stryker, DePuy Synthes, and Smith & Nephew. And it really hasn't been until the first three quarters of 2020 that these companies pulled even with their 2019 performance. So taken as a proxy for joint replacement as a whole, I think this is an encouraging development. As we move over to spine certainly took some lumps during the pandemic as well, not to the extent that knee replacement did, but a 10.3% decline in 2020. However, as we come into 2022, we're expecting spine revenues of 10.1 billion and a growth rate of 3.2%, which is meaningfully above the pre-COVID average for spine. And I think that just reflects a faster recovery in this segment. However, just like joint replacement, we're seeing capital sales, robotics having a shifting environment, but I wouldn't paint that with too broad a brush. We've heard from Globus Medical that they really haven't felt any pressure to shift how they sell their robotics and their big ticket items. But I think on average, the market is moving away from the one-time sale model. Of course, it's really hard to talk about spine in the last couple of years without mentioning ATEC and their phenomenal top-line growth. They're set to grow another 40% for 2022. And the company now has a clear line of sight in the next few years to potentially becoming a profitable company with revenues over $500 million. The other company that I always mention in that same group of share takers in the mid-tier had been C-Spine, but they made their own big splash this year announcing their merger with OrthoFix. And that combined organization represents the number 8 player by size in spine and the number 9 player overall. Highly complementary portfolio, seemingly minimal overlap between their sales forces. Now, it will be interesting to see what cultural characteristics shine through in the final company, but whatever the case, I think that company has a golden opportunity as some peers and larger competitors are share donors in spine right now. And then, of course, volume-based procurement in China will be a headwind for spine over the next several quarters. Trauma was really by far the most insulated segment from the effects of the pandemic, declining only 4.4% on the strength of more emergent procedures in 2020. In 2022, we're expecting trauma revenue of 8 billion and a 3.8% growth rate, which is slightly below trauma's pre-COVID average of 4.1. But frankly, I didn't hear much concern or anxiety over this dip from executives, really chalked up to general market softness that happens from time to time, maybe some quarterly noise. So a portion of this could be down to timing. In China, volume-based procurement is certainly impacting trauma. We saw that Smith & Nephew declined to even participate in the tender. However, one thing that has stayed the same this year for trauma is the buoyant growth of the mid-tier foot and ankle players. Paragon 28 is going to grow 22% this year, and Treese Medical at 45%. I think both of those companies have a tremendous amount of runway left, and as they grow those market segments. As we move over to sports medicine, we're expecting global sales of 6.3 billion and a 4.4% growth rate, which is meaningfully down from the pre-COVID average of 5.7 in sports medicine. And I think there's a couple factors at play here. Number one, within certain subsegments of sports medicine, procedure volumes have been slower to recover. For instance, joint repair and preservation has been a little slower to recover. And also on the capital equipment side, I think we're seeing supply constraints really impact and hurt companies' ability to build, sell, and deliver their capital equipment. And then Smith and Nephew called out the just astounding number of people under lockdown to start the year in China and how that impacted their first half sports medicine sales. And then finally, as we look over to orthobiologics, orthobiologics also took some lumps during the pandemic, about on par with knee replacement. As we move into 2022, we're expecting 5.3 billion in orthobiologics sales, representing growth of 2.4%, which is right on par with Obio's pre-COVID average. This year did bring some big changes to reimbursement for visco supplements as those products move to ASP reporting. That impact on the industry has been varied. Anika Therapeutics has reported little to no impact. Meanwhile, Bioventus sustained a far greater impact than it first suspected, causing it to lower its 2022 overall guidance. And then the other thing I think is an important factor here in orthobiologics is the C-Spine and OrthoFix merger. The combined portfolio of C-Spine, OrthoFix, and OrthoFix's partnership with MTF creates a very large and varied portfolio that maybe isn't philosophically aligned, but represents a great deal of choice to cover surgeon preference. And I think that can be a benefit to the company going forward. All right, so I want to now transition over to some early thoughts for 2023. But before I do, I think it's important we get a little desensitized to these challenges and these headwinds that have been with us for 2 going into 3 years. And I think it's important to realize that the great rate limiter, the governor of how fast the industry can recover, is hospital staffing, healthcare staffing. And I really like this quote from ConMed CFO Todd Gardner on staffing. He said, "I don't think I would believe that surgical staff levels are going to improve overnight. This is something that's going to be measured in quarters, if not 2024. There is a lot that has to happen to get back to those fully staffed levels. We're coming into seasonal flu, and who knows what will happen with COVID and child respiratory disease and how that puts burdens on the healthcare system." So through that lens, let's take a look at some of my notes for 2023. As we just mentioned, there does seem to be a meaningful procedure backlog at play, driving a very modest tailwind, but those staffing shortages are going to constrain it, and we'll see a steady flow of procedures coming back into the funnel over the next year plus. We do expect foreign currency headwinds and inflationary pressures to remain throughout the year. And a thing that I think is pretty amazing how fast it's developed is how these top companies are now highly focused on digital solutions, and they're moving a great deal of their R&D efforts in that direction. We previously heard Zimmer Biomet say something about like 70% of their efforts are towards ZB Edge, their digital ecosystem. Medtronic most recently said that a disproportionate amount of their R&D focuses on digital. However, whatever products come out of those research and development efforts are going to be commercialized in a far different environment than we've seen over the past couple of years. As we mentioned, outright sales are becoming less common, and we're seeing more and more rental agreements and volume-based agreements, or earnouts, as they're sometimes called. We expect that 2022 will be the second year in a row that orthopedic M&A declines after a flurry of activity in 2020. And the IPO environment has basically been frozen for the past couple months. Will 2023 bring improvements there? I don't see many signs pointing that direction, but who knows? And then volume-based procurement in China already affecting joint replacement, spine, and trauma, and we expect more segments will come under these national tenders going forward. And finally, before I let you guys go, I wanted to shine a spotlight on a tool that I use every day, and that is our revenue matrix. The revenue matrix is a giant table of 61 orthopedic companies, both public and private, containing their revenue information by product segment for a multi-year span. If I had to suddenly lose all of my work files, but I could pick one to save, the revenue matrix would be what I picked to save. It drove the data for this presentation. It is the backbone of our annual report. So if you're like me and you work with company data or you're working with market segment data, please do yourself a favor. Go over to OrthoWorld, grab yourself an elite membership, and download the revenue matrix. It will serve you well, and it'll save you a ton of time, just as it has for me. And once again, thank you to Triangle for helping us put on this presentation. As always, if you have any comments or questions about what we covered today or the revenue matrix, feel free to shoot me an email. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.